What you can see here is an extraordinary Viking helmet because despite what films depict as Viking combat, these guys also wore helmets since, they wanted not to die. So, on the afternoon of March 29th, 1943, there is this farmer boy named Gunnar Gjermundbu who was living at the countryside just north of Oslo in Norway, now part of the Ringerike municipality, and he was digging in a field near where a burial mound was believed to be. His intention was to level the ground in order to plant an orchard for his parents, yet he did uncover the Viking-era burial mound. It was indeed during the German occupation of Norway. Little did he know that the treasures beneath included the famous helmet, which was to carry his name and perhaps the most iconic symbol of Viking military prowess. As he dug, he quickly realized that this burial mound was in fact a grave, as artifacts and buried treasures started to appear. He let a local historian know, and then the Museum of Cultural History sent staff to assess and help excavate the discovery. Over the course of the next 2 months, 2 burial mounds were found, and historians have dated the objects to be from the later period of the 9th century, and the owner might even have had a connection to the state known as the Kievan Rus, composed out of fragments from nowadays Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. As far as the quality of the burial equipment is concerned, it is a very rich man's grave, probably the richest man's grave from the Viking Age in Norway, as it is surpassed only by ship graves, for example, from Vestfold and Nordfjord. The large burial mound that hid the find contained a variety of objects, so we have weapons in the form of 2 swords, a large weapon knife, 2 axes, 2 spears, 4 shields, a bundle of arrows, the helmet and chainmail, we have stirrups, and pieces of chess and dice, and equipment for at least 5 horses and 2 sleighs, alongside several chests and caskets. Several of the pieces are exceptionally elaborate, such as one of the swords and 1 spearhead, but what is most interesting for us are definitely the helmet and the chainmail. We are dealing with a cremation grave, as most of the objects in our find were under a large iron cauldron. It was placed with the bottom up, so under a layer that perhaps represents the remains of the cremation, with burnt bones and charcoal. The archaeologist who did the documentation, Sigurd Grieg, believed that the objects might have come from 2 different graves. It is possible, and in this case, both burials took place at the end of the 9th century, but as graves in the Viking Age were subjected to complicated rituals, what is traditionally perceived as different graves could also be interpreted as traces of different depositions. Now, more modern research into the identity of this warrior pinpoints that we are dealing with a very rich and important character. However, his identity remains unknown. Although this helmet, the Gjermundbu helmet, is unique in Scandinavia, there is evidence that some of the armor discovered along with the helmet match discoveries made in what was known as the Kievan Rus. The state has a long history associated with Scandinavia, as Norse warriors, according to both Norse and Russian sources, helped establish it during the 8th century AD. No other finds in Scandinavia contain such a helmet or a chainmail, at least in this state of preservation. But when the helmet is presented as unique, the starting point is Western European. But like I said, further east in the Kingdom of Kiev, helmets and breastplates are, although rare, elements in the rich graves from the 900s. So the Kingdom of Kiev, Gordariki in the Norse sagas, was, according to legend, founded by Scandinavian Vikings in the 8th century. Most likely we are dealing with a cultural and ethnic mix, a very big mix at the time. At its largest, the empire came to include a number of Slavic, Baltic, and Finno-Ugric peoples. Under Princes Vladimir and Yaroslav, the kingdom stretched from Ladoga near present-day St. Petersburg to the Carpathians. And after 1054, when Yaroslav died, the kingdom was divided between his sons. So the graves where the armor and helmets occasionally occur are found both in Russia and Ukraine. They are burial places which can be linked to some rulers of the Kingdom of Kiev and their armed followers, which we call druzhina. So examples include the graves at Gnezdovo near Smolensk in Russia, Chernihiv in Ukraine, Yaroslavl in Russia, and even the capital of Ukraine, Kiev. In the big mound, Chernaya Mogila in Chernihiv, for example, there was a large cremation slab. A number of objects from the funeral pyre were gathered under this layer, including 2 helmets, fragment of some breastplates, some swords, 10 spears, a large quantity of arrowheads. We also have stirrups and even 2 drinking horns studded with gilt silver, as well as Byzantine gold coins. The sleds in the Gjermundbu find also have parallels elsewhere in eastern Norway, even eastern Sweden, but also further east, such as the Plakun burial site at Staraya Ladoga. Written sources tell of the sleigh's central role in funeral ceremonies in the Kievan Empire as well. Other objects in the find, such as the sword, testify to the burial connections, international status, and links to the international environment. So the grave at Gjermundbu is definitely out of the ordinary. We have domestic traditions which show a continuity with past expressions of power, but we also have hints at this international phenomenon of rich, good graves that occur across large parts of Europe where Christian burial traditions had not yet become dominant. Interestingly, we also have a runic inscription, the Alstadstein in Norway, which is an inscription commemorating a person who died in the Kingdom of Kiev. We also have some younger sagas mentioning characters such as Olaf Haraldsson and his half-brother Harald Sigurdsson, also Eymund Ringsson, who gained an important political and military position in Kiev after Duke Vladimir's death in 1015, and also Sigurd Eriksson, Olaf Tryggvason's uncle, who was in Vladimir's Druzhina in the 900s. The heavy equestrian equipment we find in the Gjermundbu find is somehow a reminder of the Kiev princes' battles against various horsemen of the steppes to the south and east. In the 960s, for example, Sviatoslav had led campaigns against the Khazar Empire and against Bulgarians in the Balkans, and had been at war with the Pechenegs. And after Vladimir came to power, he fought against the Volga Bulgars in 985 and was constantly at odds with the Pechenegs. So I hope this was interesting for you. If yes, please consider following and subscribing.